So, about an hour or so ago, I got a major revelation. I've been spending this wonderful day walking along the river in a area close to home. There's a trail that parallels a river, and I've been walking down it. And the revelation I received is this. This is pretty normal. I guess you could call it human nature. But where I live, in the region where I live, all the small communities, all the towns, all the suburbs, they all compete against one another in the sense that they try to attract the most visitors, generate the most revenue. They try to have the best attractions. They try to have the biggest fire station or the biggest library or the best school district, etc., etc., etc. I guess you could classify that as a competitive spirit. But I was thinking, that's at a more macro level, but on the micro level, we personally all try to compete against one another. And in the process of doing this, we're unable to develop our own identity. We're unable to know who we really are. We're unable to be able to figure out who we are. And we aren't able to tap into our full potential if we're constantly focused on everybody but ourselves. We're so busy focusing on what other people are doing, and we set our standards based on what other people are doing. We base our standards on other people's standards, which keeps us from developing our own standards. How can you really know who you are when you're trying to figure out what everybody else is doing and you're trying to know who everybody else is all simultaneously? It's not going to happen. So people eventually they hit a wall, typically between 30 and 40, and they don't know who they are. This is what I believe is a major cause of midlife crisis, is because our society indoctrinates youth to try to emulate something that they can't be. They try to make people be like everybody else, and it creates a lot of false notions. But if we all focused on ourselves and what really interests us, what drives us, we wouldn't have this problem. If everybody focused on themselves, this competitive spirit that is a major driving force in our society would be eliminated. And here's the other thing that I wanted to mention. If all of us are so busy looking at each other instead of ourselves, then none of us really know who we are, or the standards that we set for ourselves are not realistic if we're looking at everybody else, because everybody else that you look at is looking at somebody else. They might even be looking at you. It's like that whole notion that the grass is greener on the other side. And on the more macro level that I mentioned earlier, when I was using the example of how the different communities in this area, how they all compete against one another to try to attract the most visitors and get the most funding and whatnot. If these communities did, or I should say not these communities, but the leadership of these communities, and this applies everywhere. This can apply to so many different things. It just doesn't have to apply to communities. It can apply to churches, corporations, clubs, whatever. Any body that has groups of people. If these communities, the community leadership, focused on meeting the needs of their people who live in their community and addressed issues like, repairing infrastructure, addressing issues dealing with crime, and serving the people that they're supposed to serve, instead of trying to one up the neighboring city, these communities would actually flourish more because they would develop their own culture, they would develop their own identity, they would develop their own uniqueness, and that is what people in our society are looking for. Uniqueness. This facade of keeping up with the Joneses is becoming evident to a majority of people now that it is not only unreal, but it is unsustainable, and it's detrimental. And I'm also saying this from personal experience. I spent the first 25 years of my life, I know when I say that, it makes me sound like I'm a lot older than I really am, but up until I was about 25, my whole life was people pleasing. That was the theme of my life. Everything came down to people pleasing. If you drew a, what do they call those diagrams? Flow chart about how I made my decisions, how I carried myself, how I did this, how I did that. It would all come down to people pleasing. And I realized after I cut all that shit out and I started doing me, I started speaking my mind, I started developing my own ideas, I started attracting people. I started becoming more secure in myself. Success became easier for me. And I'm not saying this because I'm trying to glorify myself or anything like that. But why I'm saying this is because everything that we try to do in our own ability, it ends up backfiring on ourselves. God did not make you to be like everybody else. You are fearfully and wonderfully made by God. If God wanted to make an assembly line and wanted to produce a certain type or model of an individual, he would do it. You don't wear size 10 shoes if your shoe size is 12. Why? Because that's not how God designed your foot, and your foot would not fit in a size 10 shoe. It wouldn't work. Your foot would be in pain if you tried to do that. It would be awkward for you to walk. You'd get blister heels. You'd strain the muscles in your feet. It would screw up your posture. But the thing is people, whether it's conscious or unconscious, people don't realize that they're doing that same thing by trying to measure up to other people's standards and trying to fit in. You wonder why you're miserable. You wonder why you can't stand looking at yourself in the mirror. You wonder why you're shy around certain people. You wonder why you have anxiety. You wonder why you're so confused about yourself. You wonder why it's so hard for you not to hold back. And I guarantee, this is not factual, but this is on the basis of my own opinion, just from my own life experience, I think that's the number one reason why so many people are insecure and don't want to be around other people and come together as a community, because of this overwhelming sense of insecurity, that is caused by these false notions that they have been brainwashed to believe by the Matrix. And if you want to take it even farther than that, from a spiritual and scriptural perspective, it's idolatry.